So let's start with a quick introduction about yourself, and we can, go from there.
I'll go first. I'm Billy. So I've been working around the ETH space since around 2017, was involved in a lot of early NFT projects. I was at the Waterloo, the Faded Waterloo event where
that was fun.
CryptoKitties was launched. Building out mostly a project called Clover's Network, which is like a generative art project. We did like a testnet version in 2017, but didn't go to mainnet until 2019. Along that path, I got really involved in different bonding curve work, automatic market maker things, did some stints with Gnosis Protocol, Aragon, and since 2018 have been working in the Cosmos ecosystem, where I sort of ran into the scaling issues on Ethereum when I launched Clover's Network. We had like the #1 gas guzzler for like a week, and the economics went totally skewed when gas prices went crazy. So I sort of like realized to address the problem face on, I should pick the solution that I felt made sense in the long run, and for me that's application-specific blockchains, Cosmos Network. So I've been working in that space now for about 3 years, and for the last year and a half I've been working at the Interchain Foundation, operating that on the board of management, and recently transitioned to the Cosmos Hub lead, which is the Cosmos Hub blockchain, but it's an ecosystem of application-specific blockchains. Each of them have like their own unique features, and we spent a lot of work the last year thinking about how do you have NFTs across blockchains? How do you resolve the metadata when they've been moved across these different connections, and how do you have like a unified version of that will work no matter where their origin is?
Cool. I'm Fabian Vogelsteller. I have been part of the Ethereum Foundation back in the day. From 2015 on, I was the lead DApp developer. In that time, I built the first Web3 browser, the Mist browser, for the ones who remember it. It was the first interface that people used to interact with smart contracts. I also worked on Web3.js, which is still the most popular JavaScript library in the Ethereum space. I proposed ERC20, which is the standard behind the tokens. I proposed another standard called ERC725 that probably will be a topic today. That was already 2017 as well. And since almost 3 years now, I'm working on a project called Luxo. And Luxo is actually a new blockchain that's coming that we call the blockchain for the new creative economy, which very much fits within that space here. And it's not only like a new network, a layer 1, if you want to call it like this. But it's also a new set of standards. So as I had a role to play in the standards space, or kind of like, kicked it off, let's say, with ERC20, like Luxo gives me the opportunity to rethink a lot of like the basic core pieces and how we do things on blockchain. And one really important core piece that's missing is identity. And we think we have actually solved that now. It solves a lot of problems from like user experience to actually authenticity and provenance when we're talking about NFTs, which is kind of like missing right now. But also like doing the token standards new, like kind of cleaning it up, like because it all evolved out of ERC20 and everybody can kind of like just always try to be backwards compatible to make sure that it always works with MetaMask and all the other wallets, right? Nobody really came in and thought, hey, let's do it right and let's do it different. And it's a kind of messy thing, and doing this in a new network is also easier because you don't have this noisy EIP space where now 2,000 different kind of standards try to compete with each other and everybody tries to make the next important standard. So it's kind of like having a clean slate and making it right to build the foundation for that new creative economy that we see.
Awesome.
Hello again. I feel like I was just here. So I'm Vladislav Ginzburg, CEO of Block Party. Block Party was founded in 2017, co-founded by myself and another, and it was intended to become a ticketing platform that would use NFTs as event tickets. Something that we were thinking about back then. And we were pretty successful to do that, in 6 months from forming the company. We were already ticketing events. We ticketed our own party just downtown here at Catch for our launch, and then immediately went to Elements Music Festival to start a ticketing allocation there. And then finally, in September of 2018, we ticketed our first music festival, end-to-end, where we sold 5,000 tickets. this was before, NFTs really became a topic of mainstream conversation. And we like to say that we learned in the field what the challenges are going to be for adoption of NFTs. Lots of folks say that ticketing is broken and it's hard and it is, and it's unfair and a lot of these things. But with what we propose to be a more fair and equitable solution, we were still running into problems at the actual operational level of a music festival, like bad Wi-Fi signals, cell phone connections, people wondering, why a transaction time was taking so long. People wondering, well, why do I need a wallet to use a ticket? And we were spending more time answering, why are you doing this, than telling people about why this is a better system. So obviously that's, a lot of the technologies and the tools available to make ticketing on blockchain a lot easier with NFTs are now available to us, but Block Party since then expanded to NFTs for creators and for NFT commerce beyond ticketing. And so we're doing that. We started with an Ethereum bridge, but then we added a Flow bridge. And our belief is that different brands, different creators, different musicians are going to come onto the blockchain, are going to come into Web3, and are going to want to take advantage of NFTs for their audiences. But we like to say that if you have 100 artists, 100 musicians, and 100 brands, you're going to have 300 different opinions about how to engage with their audiences. So our strategy was to build the most flexible possible platform, but then also stay true to our Web3 roots by launching NFT protocol and developing a decentralized exchange for NFTs So we actually don't even have necessarily a resale on Block Party. Our intent is to encourage NFTs to go out into a decentralized exchange environment for transactions. Cool.
So since this is an interoperability panel, I think, and the term has been used a lot, what is it? Can you guys share what your opinion of what this is and how you guys have been working towards that?
Yeah, there was a talk earlier from Mike from Pylons who was talking about the difference in standards from implementation to interfaces. And I feel like in a sort of interoperable multi-chain world, it becomes much more about the interfaces and the implementations. Basically, like, what are the endpoints to ask the questions and receive the information that I need to know from my essentially client side in order to piece together, the technical story to present a product or something. But I'd be really curious for Fabian's input on this. I mean, you've been involved in these token standards processes, and in Ethereum, it's very much about the implementation because people are redeploying them every single time. And so it's sort of this all-encompassing part. But I'd also just be curious, you mentioned a new standard that you've been really promoting since, I guess, the start of the project, Luxus, right? Could you break down very simply what the difference is between that and a standard 721?
So basically, I would say that actually in Ethereum, like in the standards process, it's about actually interfaces, not so much about the implementations. And this is really what it's all about when you're creating a standard, right? You want to make sure that the smart contract functions that you have are clear and their behavior is clear, so that you can build interfaces and all kind of other another smart contract on another blockchain that maybe interacts with the one on the other. 725 is a standard that actually I proposed before I started Luxo. That's something that I came up with in October 2017, and I proposed that standard. There was a Ethereum ES725 alliance that was forming. People wanted to use it. Bunch of projects signed up, some 40 developers, whatever, on the alliance website is still online. But then on the end, nobody really took the lead. And for me, I just put it out there, and I thought, okay, you guys do something. I'm busy with other stuff. I'm not doing anything with identity. I just had this idea. And interesting enough, nobody really took the lead. And when I then started Luxo, I really realized, oh, I need that. And it's actually super useful. So now it gave me the time to really complete that. So in terms of 725, so 725 is actually two standards. It's 725Y, which is a variable key value store in a smart contract. So now you can actually attach variables or information to a smart contract in a flexible way. So you can attach endless information, and you can update them later. That's very useful, for example, for metadata in an NFT, right? So what's the big problem with NFTs is you have like literally the only information you get out of the smart contract is which address owns which ID. And the idea mostly is a number. And then there's a token UI, which is just the URL, right? So there's multiple problems. First, there's no other information for other smart contracts to read besides which address owns what. Second, the metadata is just a link, which can also sit on a centralized service, so you change the file under the link and like the metadata changes. When you use 725Y, actually like there's another standard called LSP2. So we have this own standards proposal called Luxor Standards Proposals. So back in the day, I called it Ethereum Request for Comments because the idea was we just talk and then we standardize. Turned out that ERC became the term for the standards itself. So now I call it Luxor Standard Proposals because it's clearly already the proposal of the standard. And basically, this LSP2 defines how you encode this key value store. So there's things, for example, like a JSON URL. And a JSON URL clearly says, okay, if you want to link a JSON file, you have to put the hash function you're using, the hash, and the URL. So even if you now store it on Google Drive, you definitely know what file you get, is it correct or not, because there's a hash already in the key value store. And when you have a flexible key value store as metadata, you can attach everything. You could like reference from an NFT a different smart contract that has a different kind of logic that somehow relates to this NFT. You could add some signatures in there, some bit masks, you have bytes, so you can add anything there. And we can come up with all kinds of new standards of whatever the metadata should be. So that really extends massively what an NFT can be and how it can be represented, and also how other smart contract can interact with it, because this key value store is readable by other smart contracts as well. So if you put information there that the smart contract can act on, right, that NFT is now like a bit more flexible than it's right now. So basically what we did is like we created this, actually redid all the token standards from ERC20 to ERC721, and we call them LSP7 and LSP8. Mm-hmm. And they are based on this 725Y for metadata. But 725Y combined with 725X, which is a generic execution standard, actually creates you a account, a blockchain-based account. And that's actually the bigger deal.
Before we jump into that, the LSP basically, it almost includes some self-describing information. You know, it has the hash that you need to be able to verify the thing, but it doesn't have a complete self-description. And I'd be curious if you've come across Interoperability.NYC, some of the standards works that we've been doing, working closely with people from the DID community. DID has these sort of nice features that it has this self-describing resolution path, so you can begin with an ID and instructions about how to learn more about that thing, follow it across. That information can live in any sort of global resolver and choose between those, and it provides a pretty all-encompassing version of that.
I mean, this LSP2 is basically dead. It's the thing is, I'm aware of the DID space because obviously with 725 I wasn't invited to all of this identity stuff, and there's also here's the 725 DID that I guess somebody needs to update. So the LSP2 really like describes you specifically how this key value store is encoded and how it's to be read, and how you treat that content in there. I haven't really looked into the DID too much because when it comes about interoperability, so my approach is more, yes, we can create all kind of like off-chain and between chain systems, but we also need to first fix things on a specific blockchain, right? And the standards we are basing everything on is literally all a derivative of ERC20, more or less, when it's about tokens. And it's like a bit, we just made that shit up in 2015. And we didn't really think that through at the time because we had no time. I mean, like, people wanted to make tokens, so we came up with something, and we made the most simple version we could at the time. So that needs to be rethought a little bit and restructured before we really we can then think about the next levels, and that's useful to think. But I also think when it's about NFTs or any of these things, you have to think a little bit, it's like a country, right? If you want to build a house, you have to pick your country where you build your house. You don't build your house on the border between two countries, right? You build it in one of the two countries. And maybe you have two houses in both countries, but you still have to pick your country. And it's the same like with NFTs, right? You can't just make an NFT that just lives everywhere. It lives on a specific blockchain. And that's where it has its functionality, and that's where it interacts with the actors on that network. And we can make bridges that now make this NFT lock in here and release on over there, but they might have completely different functionality on the other chain, depending on what standards are used there, whatever.
Yeah, but I think the metaphor is a little closer to you're born in a country, but you can travel, and you need to have documents that prove where you're allowed to be, what you can do, and you have some rights in one country and you don't have those rights in another country. You know, the context is extremely important, but there needs to be a path to resolve who are you, where did you come from, why are you here, what are you doing, what can you do here, et cetera.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to travel.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what standards come into play, right? And that's why, for me, it's important to standardize these things. I mean, the standards, for example, that we are proposing in Luxo, they work on every EVM chain. You could even translate them to any other smart contract language or smart contract chain, if you want to, right? And I guess that makes sense.
Vlad, you're working on this, and you're running into it probably on a day-to-day basis. You've got NFTs across different platforms, and you're providing a unified interface, I guess. Could you talk about some of the challenges that you've run into in that, or what you've realized is the sharp edges, or the things that actually work well?
Yeah, and by the way, I love the metaphor of houses and countries. So to use that same metaphor, like we think about like Epcot, right? So you have sort of a single interface to visit different countries, and I guess the challenges that we've faced is that the first question you have to answer is what's the single source of truth, right? You have if you're one creator and you're going to release 10 NFTs and you're going to do 5 on one blockchain and 5 on another, where are you minting them? So we've started with a custodial base layer, which we call like a Web3 enabled accounting system or a minting system, because I hate saying private blockchain. And so our Web3 minting system bridges to Ethereum and bridges to Flow. So I think that interoperability is not necessarily the right word, but it's more like being blockchain agnostic. So, you know, we value the characteristics of one country, we value the characteristics of another country. So we want to be able to do that. But where the pain points are starting with that accounting system. And so you have a token that's happening internally, and you're basically asking our system to say, okay, here's your internal token, you know, and even though it is an NFT, it's still only meant to exist inside a block party. Because when we do tell our system to go mint onto Ethereum, we're basically saying copy this token, but on the standards of ERC 721. And that has come with a lot of challenges. I think the more you add steps to a certain result, the more opportunity there is for things to break. So getting that system to be very smooth and responsive, fortunately it is now. We're really happy with how responsive it is now, but certainly getting that, getting all the middleware right, getting all the processes right was certainly our big hurdle.
Nice.
Fabian, I really liked what you said earlier about like you kind of need to, I mean, now we're using the metaphor in different ways, but you like need to focus on building your house first before you worry about like, say, traveling international, which I totally agree with. And it's actually one of the reasons why in the Cosmos space we spent a lot of time, especially last year, working on this NFT, super global, absolute, covers every scenario sort of work. And we've sort of aligned our efforts to be like, all right, actually we need to like make sure that we have everything in place for the like here and now solution stuff. So application specific blockchains, that NFT is going to exist in that context, which is like pretty self-serving. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to provide all of the functionality that needed to exist on every blockchain today. You know, your blockchain is doing what it needs to do locally. But I'd be curious, you know, even with fungible tokens, we've begun seeing like a pretty large outpouring use of bridges moving across networks, mostly because of like DeFi incentives that are in new marketplaces, et cetera. But especially for Vlad, I would be curious, like, have you seen much user demand of moving NFTs between blockchains yet? Like, has there actually been the need to move them between them? Is it that users are demanding it? Is it it's technically possible? I would imagine it's sort of like, where's the best and most liquid marketplace? So I minted it on Polygon, and like, actually Polygon is supported on OpenSea now, so I don't need to move it to Ethereum to have access to that liquid market anymore. Like, has there been a lot of user activity documented of actual NFT interaction across networks?
That's a really good question, and I think it's a really interesting time to ask it, because up until really around now, NFTs have been crypto products for crypto enthusiasts. And now we're looking at onboarding lots and lots and lots of people that don't necessarily understand what makes Ethereum different than a different chain, or understand what Polygon is, what a layer 2 is. They just they're still learning blockchain 101. So the communities that we've served in the past there's been really less of a demand, right? There's Ethereum folks are really passionate about Ethereum, and Wax folks are really passionate about Wax, and so you have these fragmented communities. But as we are onboarding all these newer fans, you have things like NBA Top Shot, and you have things like a lot of the musicians that we listen to doing their NFT sales. And they're selling to their fans, not fans of a particular crypto community. So that onboarding community doesn't really know the difference yet between what makes this chain particularly different than that chain. But increasingly, I'm seeing the demand coming from not the consumers, but the creators. The creators are responding to things we see in the news, and whatever the news may be about the energy consumption of Ethereum, they're asking for, well, is there a less energy consuming blockchain? So you see different platforms popping up that answer that question and make it a big part of their marketing approach. And
that's still the starting point of that interaction, though. They decide to deploy for the first time at a new spot. Whereas, I can imagine identity might actually be a situation. There's all sorts of debates about whether you should use NFTs for identity, which I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on. But that, it's NFTs with affordances, that you actually need this sticky thing over here in order to do this other thing, because it has to be part of the state machine in order to access it. It's not just client-side only resolution sort of questions.
Actually, I think the answer is NFTs need identity, not identity will be an NFT. And the thing is also not everything is a token. There's this one thing that happened with ERC20 is that now everybody thinks, oh, everything is a token. So now everything is an NFT. There's different kind of smart contract constructions you can make that have nothing to do with a token. For example, a smart contract-based account, it's not a token. It's a smart contract that is your account, and that can be controlled by multiple keys, and it can have a face, profile picture, all kinds of information attached to it. And it has a way to react to incoming assets. So you can actually now reject assets, or you can store them into your profile, so you can build up a nice profile website that shows what you have. That has nothing to do with an NFT. But NFTs need this kind of identity, because right now, the truth is, all the NFTs are worthless that we are creating. Because you go on the chain and you see, Rennekamp has created an NFT, 2 years down the road when super rare or wearable is offline. Who the fuck knows still who that was, or if it was an important guy. And the creator itself doesn't even have the address anymore, because he lost his ledger, or he used MetaMask and reinstalled his computer. So he has no way ever to prove that it was a real thing. You have to go to the Internet Archive and hope that you still find the website where it shows, look, it was his profile picture next to this address. That needs to be solved on-chain with smart contract-based accounts. And as long as we don't have that, that space is, this is literally buying nothing. Because there's no proof in 2 years that this is anything. And this is really a bit of a funny thing to watch. But concerning the interoperability, I do think it makes sense to sometimes move an NFT from one chain to another. Let's say on Ethereum there's a lot of crazy DeFi protocols, and it makes sense now to have let's say you have an NFT on Luxor, and you want to move it over to Ethereum, because now you can do some crazy lock in and double, triple, whatever DeFi weird shit that you can do. Triple your NFT in some weird way. But the thing is, with these new kind of flexible standards that we have, and the kind of NFTs that you now can build with these new standards are so much more complex and flexible, because now it's not just a mapping of an address to an ID and a JSON file, but now can be complex algorithms that represent this NFT that are somehow have 5 protocols attached to one NFT. You cannot just easily move that over to another chain. So literally, let's say if we take the example, Luxor would be then the chain where the NFT has a functionality, where it really lives and interacts in a crazy way with different systems. But when you move it to another chain, it becomes something very simple. It just becomes a representation of the asset.
That's not a requirement,
lock
though.
into smart contracts.
With the IDs and IBC, you can transfer any arbitrary data, and usually they're broken down in between affordances and encumbrances. Encumbrances prevent things from happening, and affordances are attributes that are relevant to the state machine. You do need some level of context to be able to do something with that information. But it is
the
one of
information
the
that you're transferring is really who's the owner, how you represent. like NFT in some kind of ID or whatever
At a
form,
minimum,
right?
at a minimum. But the idea with inner NFT standards and the idea is that that amount of data can be expanded kind of infinitely to the use that
Yeah, but
it's
also the
relevant.
logic. And the logic is gone the moment you move it to another chain. If you would not redeploy exactly the same smart contract structure and level of protocols that might be connected to like protocols that have some very complex logic that you can never move over because the logic only exists on this one chain.
But it's the same thing as like traveling internationally. Like, you know, I have whatever, I can go to a region, but I might not go there because I know that my rights aren't going to be protected there.
I mean, I guess like the right in terms of ownership and, you know, saying who you are.
Or the right of like, I'm allowed to cross the street. You know what I mean? Like that's an affordance. And maybe in this blockchain, people aren't allowed to cross the street. You know, the fact that I'm not going to go into a country where I need to be able to cross the street. So I choose which places I go, but I'm able to bring with me, you know, at least the certificate that says I'm allowed to cross the street.
No, I agree. I mean, I agree. And I do think there's reasons to sometimes move NFTs, but the NFT is not the same NFT anymore on the other chain because now it's literally more like a representation of the original NFT
It's a guest.
on the other chain.
It's a guest.
And the original NFT is then locked into whatever system that when you ever move it back, you now have your real NFT back with your full functionality, whatever it does in that country, right, that blockchain. But as long as it's somewhere else, it's just, again, a representation of the asset that now could be locked in and like, do something in some protocol or whatever.
This is
choose
interesting.
wisely.
So our time is up, but thank you. Thank you, Billy. Thank you all. This is fun.
Thanks.
Thank you.